What's going on, everybody? This is your good friend, the Edge Runner, your psychedelic friend in all times and places. Um, Today, I wanted to do a video or a short talk on logical fallacies, and these are, if you don't know, these are misconceptions or flaws in reasoning, um, or thoughts, deceptive thoughts, basically, or illusory thoughts that often succeed in obfuscating the truth, or at least the attempt to get to the truth. So these often occur in argumentation with others. Argument meaning, talking, debating about a various topic. But they also, unfortunately, happen a lot in our own minds and thought processes. And do not get it twisted. We all are guilty of using and utilizing these fallacies, um, whether it's to pacify ourselves, whether it's to justify a behavior or rationalize a behavior that we have done, or rationalize a thought process or a belief. Like, for example, a lot of people that believe in a god, for instance, depending on the religion, they are very often, when confronted with what they believe and why, as you can see in many videos on YouTube, they often fall back onto logical fallacies that they don't even realize they're doing, and after they're even pointed out to them, they usually become very defensive, and this is not helpful or healthy. So we all need to recognize that we commit these fallacies, just like Freud taught us about repression and denial. We all do these things because this is the way that we deal with reality. Okay, if we did not repress or deny or sublimate, there's many defense mechanisms. If we did not do these things, we would probably be completely nuts. But these defense mechanisms kind of keep us sane enough. You understand? They kind of keep us sane enough, so we kind of live in a collective madness where we all kind of just don't talk about it. We all just kind of understand underneath, at least hopefully we all do, that we're all insane, and that we're all using different methods and different defense mechanisms to cope with whatever this reality is. Because I have no fucking idea what this reality is, and I know you don't either. Because this reality, whatever this is, once you start to poke at it, once you start to pry at it and run and test the edges, as my channel and podcast is going to attempt to do, you will see whether it's through you can investigate it through many ways: philosophical argument, or language being one of them. You can investigate it through molecules, such as the psychedelic molecules, which we will talk about. You can investigate it through travel, sex. All these things dissolve boundaries and show you that everything that you think you know is bullshit. And at the very least, you should be able to reason well, because reason is a beautiful thing. Logic is a beautiful thing. To be able to think clearly and to be able to talk and argue rationally is very important, and it's something that's being lost on many people. Okay? Because if you start to use these logical fallacies or fall for them, unfortunately fall for some of them, unfortunately that's going to allow you to continue to either use them or to continue to fall for them. They're very insidious. And once you hear them once, or you hear a version of them once and you accept it, you are much more likely to accept that in the future, and you might even use it on someone else. So, what I'd like to do today is keep it short, but just go through some basic logical fallacies that are common. There are many of them. We're going to focus on what are called informal logical fallacies, and I promise this won't be boring because you will realize that you do these things, and this will relate to you. And it should be interesting, and it should be important to you to know when you're committing one of these fallacies or when someone else is, so that you can call them out on it. Okay, so I'm just going to go over maybe 10 out of the possible 100 of them that keep coming up. But the first one, and this is one that most people have heard before, I believe, and that would be ad hominem, an ad hominem attack. This is when a person, say you're arguing with them or debating with them or having a conversation with them, will, instead of responding to your questions regarding what you guys are talking about or debating about, they will begin to attack you as a person. So they will change the direction of the argument to the other person. So the ad hominem attack, it's a logical fallacy. It's associated with trying to undermine the opponent's arguments by personal attacks through attacking their character or skill level. The ad hominem attack uses an accepted fact about a person to undermine their credibility. This happens a lot, and I know you see this a lot. Trump did this a ton. He would attack people's character rather than their arguments, and that is a clear example of ad hominem. The ad hominem attack uses an accepted fact about a person to undermine their credibility despite the lack of causal connection between the two parts. So, for example, Bill claims that that this was an accident, but we know Bill to be a liar, so we can't take his word for it. Even though Bill may be a liar, his character does not automatically make him or anything he says untrue. Remember that. Just because you don't like a person, or you don't like a quality about that person, you cannot overgeneralize to everything about them. A perfect example is, and this might be controversial or it might not be, but the Unabomber, if you remember him, if you've ever read his manifesto, the guy was smart as hell, and it made a lot of sense, okay? Unfortunately, he was a psychopath, and he decided to murder some people, and that was where he kind of went off the rails in my book, but some of his ideas are rock solid and make a ton of sense to me. And so he was very smart. He was a professor, and you shouldn't he did blow people up. He did send bombs in the mail, but that should not have any bearing on his writing, if that makes any sense. It's hard to separate the two, I know. So, and a lot of people fall for this fallacy, ad hominem. It's very easy, especially once you start to get frustrated or defensive. A lot of times, religious people, when I debate them, well, once I start to pull away the veils, they get defensive, and once they get defensive, they start to attack my character. Well, you're this, and you know what? You need to do that, or you need to do this. You're a piece of shit, or stuff like that. Like these are things that are just defense mechanisms and diversions from actually addressing the argument. Okay, so it's called the ad hominem. Okay, the next one is called anecdotal. This is a very common fallacy. So, in the anecdotal fallacy, if you know what an anecdote is, everybody knows what that is, I'm sure. An anecdote is a story, or a personal experience that someone gives, or a personal testimony. Okay? So, an anecdotal fallacy, it uses a personal experience or an isolated example instead of a sound argument. Okay? And not only that, but the multiplication of many anecdotes. So if you have a lot of anecdotes, um, the plural of anecdote is not evidence. This is something you need to understand. Just because you have a bunch of different people saying the same thing or the same thing in writing doesn't mean it's true. They're just anecdotes, they're just personal testimonies, and they are not evidence. They're not considered evidence. For me, they're not considered evidence. To some people, they might be a form of evidence, but they're a very weak form of evidence. But it is a fallacy to use personal experiences instead of a sound argument. Um, Something like, well, my dad didn't, my dad smoked cigarettes until he was, 87 years old and died. He never got lung cancer. You hear people say stuff like that all the time. But the fact that my dad didn't get cancer or another kind of disease because of smoking does not mean that someone else with the same behavior would have the same result, right? You can't take someone's personal n equal 1, which is a sample of 1. You cannot use that as any kind of statistic, any kind of evidence. Okay, that's a very common one, the anecdotal fallacy. Next, we are going to the appeal to authority. Very common. The appeal to authority. It makes the argument if one is a credible source and believes something, that it must be true. So someone might say, well, if the Pope says that an aspect of the Bible is true, then it should be added to the creed since he is infallible. Okay, because he's an authority figure, right? So you could also say, well, and science, people in science do it all the time. We all do it. You make an appeal to authority. Well, Stephen Hawking says, or Neil deGrasse Tyson says this, or Brian Greene, has this, and that's all well and good. But I care about what's true, and so should you. And just because someone is famous, or just because they are an authority, does not mean they can't be wrong, right? People are human beings, and just because they have experience, just because they have the authority, it's not a guarantee. This is why a lot of people will get a second opinion at a doctor from a doctor. It's a good idea to get a second opinion if you have a serious diagnosis. You want to find out for sure. So you don't want to just assume because he's considered an authority figure that you're wrong and he's right. So that's just a very common fallacy. I'm sure as I'm reading them off, I'm hoping that you're going back into your life and seeing, oh shit, I do that sometimes too. Okay, so the next one is the burden of proof. This is very important because this is a central fallacy. Now, the burden of proof is something that we have when someone makes a claim about something. So if I say to you, I have a dragon in my garage right now, I have made a claim. That's a claim. And that claim carries with it a burden of proof, which means that it is up to me to demonstrate the truth of this claim. It's not up to you to disprove it. Okay, so the burden of proof is on the person who makes the claim, not on the person who denies or questions the claim. The fallacy of the burden of proof occurs when someone who is making a claim puts the burden of proof or shifts the burden of proof onto the other party to disprove what they are claiming. So, for example, I believe that God exists, says one person. And maybe I say, well, how can you prove it? And the other person says, I don't have to. If you can't prove that God doesn't exist. So do you see how the burden of proof has been shifted onto me? The person that makes the claim, I believe that God exists, must demonstrate that claim. And if you shift the burden of proof, that is a fallacy, saying, well, you can't disprove it because no one can disprove a negative. This is not possible. So make sure if you make a claim, you're able to support that claim with evidence, reason, logic, and not shift the burden of proof to the other person. Okay? Most people don't know some of these, and it's very important to think clearly when you're talking to people. Very important indeed. A couple more and then we're done, all right? There's a ton of them. I'm telling you, there's just a ton of them. There's argumentum ad populum, very popular one. This is also known as appealing to the people. This fallacy presumes that a proposition must be true because most or many believe it to be true. Just like people say, well, 75 to 80% of human beings across the world believe in some sort of higher power. Well, so fucking what? That's a fallacy. That's the fallacy of the argumentum ad populum. Do you understand? Just because a lot of people believe it to be true does not make it true. Everybody used to believe that, before germ theory was discovered, people believed tons of people believed in crazy things. And rightly so, because they didn't have the information. They didn't know what germ theory was until it was discovered. And once it was discovered, now we have a theory of germs, of microbiology, and its support. And we have made the claim that we have a hypothesis that diseases are caused by germs, and the burden of proof is on the person making the claim, right? So we support that claim, scientists do, with evidence, research, repetitive experiments, peer review. Okay, other people can do the same experiment and get the same result, and through that, a model is developed. A model of reality kind of starts to build itself, because if I do an experiment here and these results come out this way, and someone in Sweden does the same experiment, I don't know who the fuck this guy is. He just read my paper, and now he's trying it out and he's getting the same results. And now someone over in Germany, and then you know what I'm saying? It adds up. And because of that, the same results are being. It strengthens the hypothesis. The claim is becoming supported. The burden of proof is being met. Okay, but by appealing to a lot of people, by saying a lot of people do this, okay, or like when I was younger and smoked a lot of weed, I hung out with a ton of people that smoke weed. So I used to say, well, man, everybody smokes weed. It's not, what's the big deal? Everybody smokes it. Well, not everybody does smoke it, but around me, it seemed like everybody did, because everybody did. I associated with only people that smoked weed. So you have to be mindful of these fallacies that we do. We trick ourselves very easily. So you just kind of have to be on your toes, Let's do 2 more, okay? How's that? And then we'll be done. Let's see here. How about the argument from ignorance? God damn, this is such a common fallacy. The argument from ignorance. Basically, it's a way of saying, well, I don't know how it could have happened, so it must be this. a good example is we don't know what happened at the Big Bang or before the Big Bang, so it must have been God. Okay, that is an argument from ignorance because, or another similar fallacy is the argument from personal incredulity. So just because someone finds something difficult to understand, they simply don't because they don't know how it works. They conclude that it's likely untrue. Do you know what I'm saying? So just because something's very, very difficult to understand, you automatically throw it out because you can't understand it. So you're just like, nope, it can't possibly be true. That is the argument from personal incredulity, which means, not believing. The argument from ignorance is a similar thing. It's saying, well, shit, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang, so we don't even know, what happened. So it must be. So insert God, or you could also say, well, someone could say to you, well, how else could it have happened? How else could it have happened? That's the argument from ignorance. Well, it couldn't have happened any other way. What other way could it have happened? Just because you are ignorant to other ways of thinking doesn't mean that you're right. And ignorance doesn't mean stupidity. Ignorance just means you're just not aware of the information yet. We are all ignorant to different degrees. And hopefully this little video or talk educated you a little bit about what it means to be fallacious and engage in fallacious reasoning. The last one we'll do is let's see. How about the good old fashioned circular reasoning? Because this happens all the time. The fallacy of circular logic occurs when one reasoning begins with a claim they are trying to conclude with. So when you're saying it's basically when you are using the thing you're trying to prove in the premises. You know what I'm saying? So you already have a kind of smuggled in what you want to be true into the argument before you've come to the conclusion. And then the conclusion says, well, then therefore God is true or God is real. But you smuggled God in one of the premises above that. So that argument is circular. And that is a very common fallacy. So this is just something to wet your beak a little bit, I'm just kicking back at home. It's 3:50 in the morning. Jesus, I gotta go to bed because I have to work at 2 in the afternoon tomorrow. But I am going to be making another video and starting the channel up with the Edge Runner podcast. I'm going to be starting that up. So I wanted to make sure that my audience, or people that are listening, have a good sound understanding of reasoning, because we're going to be using language, and if I make a mistake or if I make a fallacy or commit a fallacy, I need to be called out because I need to be corrected, because I don't want to be thinking in reasoning in a fallacious way. That's not a way to lead me to truth. That's a way of deluding myself, and I don't want to be deluding myself. So this is why we need each other to call each other out. So please, I know that I won't be offended by comments of people that say, hey, you just committed a fallacy. You can't do that. So if you want, on your own free time, go and investigate on the internet. There's charts of logical fallacies, tons of them. But those are just some to get you kind of understanding how deceptive we are to ourselves and to others, unintentionally. A lot of times we don't mean to do it. We just have flawed reasoning, And this is the problem. Some people say, well, what's the problem if it makes someone feel good? Well, the problem is, if you're fallacious here in one part of your life, it's going to affect and infect other parts of your life, which is going to affect your behavior, your actions, who you vote for, how you live your life, and that is going to affect other people, because we live in a society, in a culture. And I have a lot to say about culture, but that's for the next video. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to making the video tomorrow, because it is going to be about culture and the illusion of culture and the almost prison of culture. You'll see what I'm talking about when I get there. I'm sure most of you already have an idea if you kind of walk along my bent, as an edge runner, as a person who likes to perturb consciousness, a person who likes to see how far reality goes, and if I can peek outside the cultural machinery, if I could put my head outside and just take a peek. That's my goal all the time. I really want to. I know I live in culture, but I don't want to be of culture. So thank you for listening, and all the best to everybody. Have a good night. Thank you.